Right. My guest today is Damian McGenity. The last time I spoke to him, it was about Brexit, as he's a leading voice with the Border Communities Against Brexit organisation. But I'm going to be talking to him about that, but I'm also going to be talking to him about COVID. So, welcome, Damian. And could we start by asking you the key point, really, about these clusters that we're told of COVID cases that have developed in Cavan, particularly, where Cavan is now getting the largest number pro rata of cases, bigger than Dublin. What's happening there?
Well, good to talk to you again, Jude, in a more complicated environment than we spoke the last time on, which was purely Brexit. Well, I suppose, when you look at data and clusters, you have to remember, and as you rightly said, Cavan, per head of population, has got a bad cluster of COVID. But, the talk about the spillover from the border is only talk, because neighbours of mine in the parish that I live in have had COVID, but none of them have been tested. Thankfully, they weren't ill enough to need A&E or to be brought into hospital. So we have a cohort of virus in the north amongst our population that is utterly unknown. And I suppose the benefit that the south has is that people have access to testing. Yes, there's problems with it and it's a bit delayed, but we have no access to testing. So while there may be, and I don't dispute that there's a cluster in Cavan, and I don't know what the cause of that is, there could well be a cluster in Armagh or in Tyrone or in Antrim, but we as citizens living in the north can't get a handle on that because there's no testing.
So that's a serious difference. I understood that the both parts of the island had agreed they'd signed some sort of document whereby they would coordinate their efforts to fight this virus. Are they not doing that? Is there that significant difference in terms of the possibilities?
Yes, there is that significant difference in that there's a memorandum of understanding about how they would go about things. But certainly when it comes to the key issue of testing, and remember it's WHO advice and it's the advice of the European Health Agency, how do you know what virus exists in a community without testing? And in my community, where I live, I know at least 10 or 12 people who have had COVID. Thankfully, they've remained at home, no test available. So there is a significant difference there. I farm, have done most of my life part-time, and we have a situation on this island where we treat animals better when it comes to human health and serious disease than we do humans. If I buy an animal in Wales or Scotland or England and bring it onto this island, it has to be tested. And surely we're clever enough with the experts that are available and what we have learned from China and how this horrible disease has impacted in Italy and other European countries, that we have a natural advantage to tackling this disease. And that's because we are an island. We should have a common approach. We believe, and I believe, and BCAB believes, we should be testing the community. You can then find out the level of the disease and you can isolate the disease. And then we should be talking about how, as an island, we manage our island from this disease going forward.
Could I ask you a sort of a key question? Maybe it's difficult. Are decisions about health, about fighting the COVID virus, are they being taken at least partially for political reasons?
Well, what I would ask people to do is to go back and listen to Boris Johnson on the 2nd of February, where he made a speech where he effectively talked about the UK not being shackled to the economic disaster of tackling COVID, about locking society down. That he talked about we would have to take off the Clark Kent glasses and that the UK would have to do this and do it uniquely differently. And that's where this approach of herd immunity came from. And that approach of herd immunity has been diluted. They knew that the NHS was going to be absolutely a tsunami of patients. The death rate would have been horrific. and then they've stepped back from that. But they have not stepped up to WHO, test and trace. And how can a society tackle a disease unless you know where that disease is? And yes, that's where the difference has been got here. But there needs to be an evidence base. When you listen to Gabriel Scally and others who are experts in this, they say, in the WHO, you test, you isolate, and that's a position that we need to get to. How can we open up our society and open up our garden centres and our churches and our places of work without that safeguard of knowing where the disease is in our community?
So do you feel, does Arlene Foster, or the health minister up in the north, have the power to ramp up the amount of testing that's necessary so it is actually level with that in the south?
I don't see any reason why they cannot. Health is fully devolved. You know, private companies like Regen and Uri, for example, the Orange Order, have done amazing work in buying PPE for our health service. You mean to tell me that our health minister can't order testing kits and set up a mechanism whereby widespread community testing and antibody testing can be put in place? Of course it can. I just don't level the responsibility for this at Arlene Foster and at our health minister. They're held by people from the unionist tradition. But there's collective responsibility here by every single executive minister. They have to look at their conscience and they have to articulate why we have to do this and why we have to treat COVID as a threat to everyone on our island. It doesn't matter what tradition you come from. COVID-19 doesn't care whether you're from the unionist or from the nationalist tradition if it gets into your body.
Finally, before we sort of move over to the conjunction between COVID and Brexit, do you think that there are decisions being made and differences being made north and south for political reasons rather than health?
Oh, yes, of course. And people are looking over their shoulder at the UK, at what they're doing. And we saw in Brexit, you know, almost it got to a point where there were decisions being made so that the North would be different. And we saw that at the very tail end of Brexit. And that's not good for this island, but especially when you have a virus that's as virulent, that's as deadly as this. And like the island of Ireland isn't doing especially well with COVID. Like we looked at statistics the other evening, there were 1,500 people have died. This is the official figures on this island with COVID. That's roughly about 215 people per million. Germany have less than 80, and some of the other European countries. The UK is heading for, well, they're sitting at about 315 or 320 per million deaths at the moment and rising. These are our loved ones. These are our friends and our family. So surely the rational and the scientific way of dealing with this disease is to do it island-wide and use our island to our strengths.
Damian, just again before we move to talk about Brexit, a couple of the ministers, Heather Humphreys, for example, and some other ministers from the south, have said, you know, there's no problem. They're not standing up and shouting about the fact that you have this difference in testing north and south. Should they not be doing this?
Well, you know, you would think that they would be saying that extremely loudly privately. I can understand why Heather Humphreys and others in the south don't want to create a very public row about this. That's understandable. These issues are, unfortunately, on this island politically sensitive. But surely, you know, Heather and the health minister and Leo Varadkar know very well that you cannot tackle this disease without testing. And surely, you know, the first minister, the health minister and others are bound to realise that the only way we can stamp this out on this island is to test, to trace and to isolate it.
Okay, let's move to the conjunction. As I said at the beginning, When I talked to you over a year ago, we were thinking things have got about as bad as they possibly could. And you were talking for Border Communities Against Brexit. Now you have this blanket, this health blanket, this health global crisis laid on top of that. What effect is that going to have on the Brexit negotiations, do you think?
Well, I think what it has done, it has certainly taken it out of the public mind. It has fallen completely off the headlines. We had today at the meeting, the first meeting of the Joint Committee, and there were, I think it was Dr. Andrew McCormick, took that meeting on behalf of the executive. We saw this week where Michael Gove was saying very publicly that Belfast would not be allowed to have an EU office. That's utterly unacceptable. You know, we have devolution here, Mr. Gove. Remember the Good Friday Agreement? So it is in the gift of, we believe, the finance minister, we have publicly called it on this week, to make whatever space is available that the EU may require. The EU and the protocols relating to the North, particularly about the checks that will be required for goods coming from Britain into the North and into Ireland, have to have those checks because of EU rules around health issues for food and issues around single market and customs issues. So of course there has to be office space. Of course there has to be people on the ground to do those checks. But we see another example of them trying to hollow out an agreement that is already made. Bigger issue, and Barnier talked about it last week, and I don't think ideologically Britain has got its head around this space. They're willing, the EU is willing to do a wide-ranging free trade deal with the UK. However, that free trade deal can only occur if Britain agree to abide by certain key EU rules. You'll hear Barnier talking about the level playing field. That's what it really is. So Britain can't deregulate its economy. For example, if you manufacture goods and you strip out health and safety and environmental legislation and workers' rights, you can create and make that product cheaper than the Europeans can. That's what this is about. So I don't see how the never the twain can meet here, unless there's an ideological shift within Downing Street about the working to EU rules. How can they have a free trade deal? Then that begs the question, if you operate your economy to EU rules, why would you leave the EU in the first place? The EU, not only with its market, but with the trade deals that Europe have in place, represents 66% of Britain's trade. This is an economic calamity coming in January at WTO rules on top of a health and a coronavirus calamity. This is a really serious economic situation facing us.
So do you think in the end that Boris Johnson and the British government will make the choice in favour of complete sovereignty, that is to say freedom from any regulations matching with the EU, even if it is against their own, apparently against their own economic interests?
I think, yes, that today they are still wedded to that ideology, that Westminster must be supreme, that they will retain that sovereignty, that they can go out in the world and get these trade deals. I don't see many trade deals has emerged thus far. And that's a huge, huge economic threat. The UK are sitting tonight at about 2.4 trillion of public debt. It's costing nearly £50 billion per year to pay the interest on that debt. It's like an interest-only mortgage. And that debt pile will continue. And if the economy will contract this year because of COVID, and then you bring a shock next January where Nissan and pharmaceutical companies and the financial service industry are out of that EU market, operating to WTO rules, and you have the home economy, which will then be flooded by cheap imports from around the world, made to a lesser EU standard. This is some mess coming on the horizon.
Do you think is Boris trying to just, as they say, run down the clock? Because as I understand it, June actually is a sort of a key month with regard to negotiations, not really the end of the year. June, is that right?
Yeah, that's completely correct. There has to be an agreement by the end of June as to whether there will be an extension of the transition period, which runs out on the 31st of December. And I think really that agreement to extend would have to happen between the 13th and the 15th of June to allow then a council meeting to occur to have that ratified. I don't believe today, listening to the nonsense from Gove about an EU office and many other issues that are emanating, I don't see an ideological shift. And that's what would have to happen. You know, you cannot expect to have a free trade deal with the European Union and not play your economy on the level playing field that Europe require. So how is this square going to be circled? Okay,
finally, Damian, are you relieved at least that, as distinct from the last time I was talking to you, there's not going to be presumably a land border in Ireland, that the border is effectively going to be in there?
Oh, absolutely. Like that is absolutely huge. And the work that was done to deliver that was huge. This went down to the wire. I remember on the Wednesday of that week, the agreement was had on the Thursday morning. There was enormous issues came up, particularly around VAT. There were certain people here in the north demanded that the north be taken out of the EU intra-VAT area, which would mean for business, if you buy goods in the south, you couldn't claim the VAT back for 10 months. It would have killed the business's cash flow. We fought that issue that day with Barnier's team and with Verhofstadt's team, and there was stand-up rows happening in Europe between those negotiators and British negotiators, and Boris Johnson then on the Thursday morning rode back and effectively signed the deal. But it's the implementation of this is going to be critical, because there'll be feet dragged all over the place. And our politicians in Stormont are going to have to sharpen their pencil, get up a little bit earlier in the morning, and make damn sure what's agreed is actually put into practice. And we'll be watching them.
On a scale of 1 to 10 then, 1 being zero confidence and 10 being total confidence, how confident are you of a good
outcome? Probably at a 4.
Not too reassuring, really.
No, well, look at it. Experience tells us that they will try and hollow out what's agreed. They're doing that as we speak. I don't see our politicians as sharp on this issue as they ought to be. There's been a lot of relaxation, shall we say, has been done. I know people are working from home, but the interaction that we have with politicians at the moment is quite poor on this issue. So I absolutely want to see them step up.
Okay, thanks very much, Damian. That's great. Good talking to you again.